Here inside Lightroom, the first thing that I need to do is figure out which image I want to edit. And we're going to start out pretty basic today. And I'm going to open up a very, very simple landscape. And this image was shot while I was in Oklahoma, and it's pretty flat. And this is something that's pretty typical when you work with images off of a digital camera. It creates this kind of sad little flat digital blah to the photo. It doesn't enhance it in any way, so it doesn't enhance the contrast or the color information. It doesn't add any cool filters. A lot of times it just looks pretty flat when you get it right out of the camera. And this is going to be one of those images that we want to work on and pump up a little bit. Now, no matter what program you use, it doesn't really matter. I always recommend that you do a little bit of basic editing in your program. So here in Lightroom, you could take this into the develop module. Maybe if there's an overexposed sky, I might want to fix it up just a little bit. Or if there's some really dark shadows you want to brighten up, you can go in and you could do that. So it just depends on what the image is. This photo is pretty flat. There isn't really much to it as of right now, so I don't need to do any basic edits to it. It's pretty good. Good exposure, decent enough contrast straight out of camera, and pretty decent color information. So let's go ahead and take this into Perfect Effects. Now, this image is a PSD file, and this isn't my original image off of the camera, but as a precaution, and this is what I always do with all of my images, no matter what format they are, whether they're duplicates of the original, whatever it may be, I want to right-click on my photo and go to Edit in Perfect Effects 4. And the reason why I do that here inside Lightroom is because it pops up this dialog box, and it allows me to make sure that I edit a copy of my file instead of my original. When you work with raw files, just a quick note before we go into effects, when you work with raw files, it automatically creates a copy of it no matter what. So you're never going to destroy your original. If you're going to be taking images and you're going to be shooting in JPEG format, you always want to make sure that you edit a copy of that original photo so that you don't destroy your work. So I always like to note that before I go into Perfect Effects, just to make sure people are editing copies. You never ever want to edit your original because you never know if you want to go back to it. All right, so let's go ahead and go into Perfect Effects here. Now, for this image, I really, really need to go in and I need to pump up the landscape. It's very, very dull. There are a couple categories that are specific to working with landscapes. And one of them is luckily called the landscape category. So it makes it nice and easy. On the left-hand side in the effects library, you'll see it's right over here. It's labeled landscape, nice and easy. I can open it up and take a look at what's inside. Now, really quickly, instead of taking a look at these previews here on the left-hand side in the effects library, I actually want to take a look at them in the full screen view. I want to use our brand new Quick View browser. And the Quick View browser is the little icon on the right-hand side of each one of these categories. And it's a little grid and a little play button. And it's next to each one of these categories here. So to open that up, you just click once on that icon, and it'll show me the full screen view of all of these different effects inside that landscape category. And this is a really good way to take a look at the effects without having to look at my full boring preview in the middle. I want to see what my image is going to look like with whatever preset I decide to choose. And I like to use the full screen browser because I can actually look at these images nice and big. And I think that's really nice. All right, so let me scroll through and show you a couple here. We've got some specific season enhancers, I guess it would be. So we've got a fall enhancer here that pumps up all of the reds and makes all of the orangey yellow colors become a little bit more reddish. So the fall enhancer is great when you're working on images that you really want to pump up all of those warmer fall colors. We have a golden hour enhancer here, which is really great when you have an image and you want to pump up that really beautiful end of the afternoon light. It's absolutely gorgeous. And the golden hour enhancer I use on everything, landscapes or portraits. It really doesn't matter, which is really great. I'm going to scroll down, and the next set of presets here are called the magic presets. And these are the ones that I always recommend you start with. They're labeled for which type of landscape you're going to be editing. So city, desert, forest, ocean, or sunset. And you'll see each one of them is just a little bit different. Magic Forest enhances the greens, pumps up the contrast. Magic City adds kind of a gritty look to it. Magic Desert pumps up a lot of the warmer tones, which it won't do in this image because there isn't a lot. Magic Ocean really intensifies all of the blues. And then Magic Sunset goes in and it adds a very, very nice kind of warmer reddish orange hue to the image. So there are all of the magic presets, and then right down at the bottom there are a couple more. There's a summer and a spring preset that are specific to the certain times of year, as well as something called a red enhancer. So you've got a whole bunch of options here in the landscape category, and I'm going to go ahead and choose one. Now I'm going to start out with kind of a choice that you may not necessarily think of right away. I'm going to choose Magic City. When you choose one, you just click on it once, and it'll add it to your image. Now, the reason why I chose Magic City is it does desaturate and darken a little bit, but it adds a really, really great contrast and clarity and intensity to the image that I really, really love. And I like the way that it looks on this image. And we'll go in and we'll pump up the color in just a minute. When you add an effect, this Magic City preset is really great. However, it's a little too intense for this image. And there's an amount slider in your effects stack that allows you to reduce the amount of the effect and how it's being applied to your image. I'll take this amount slider and move it over to the left, and you'll see I'm going to slowly restore this back to my original photo. When I drop it down to 0, this is my original image. So play around with the amount slider. It's a very great way to kind of reduce an effect if it's just a little too strong. So I'm going to drop this down to about 75%. Now, the next thing I need to do is really, really pump up all that color information. So inside the effects stack, I want to click on the Add Empty Effect button. It's the Add button right down there. And it adds an empty effect layer, so now I can place a color enhancing layer on there. I want to pump up those blues. So this is how you combine multiple effects together here inside of Perfect Effects. So let's go ahead and start out on the left-hand side. And I'll open up the color correction category. Now inside the color correction category, I won't open this up in the quick view browser. I'll just open it up right here on the left-hand side. You've got some automatic presets, which can sometimes work, but for this image, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna leave this one alone. I don't want to do any auto adjustments. I want to do everything by hand. I'll scroll down and you'll see we've got things that allow you to make the image cooler. You have the ability to darken the sky, which I'll actually select here and click on, and it goes in and it darkens all of the blues and aquas in your image. And this is a really, really great way. If you have a sky that was a little blown out, but it's still a soft blue, you can darken it just a little bit with that darkened sky option there. We have an option here to increase color, which is what we're going to be using. So I'll click on that, and it just pumps up the color in the entire image. Now, on the right-hand side of the screen, the Effect Options pane, the bottom right-hand corner here, has popped open. And you'll see you have all of these different options and all of these different sliders now. The Effect Options pane is one of the coolest parts inside Perfect Effects. And some presets, or some effects on the left-hand side, will have access to this pane, and some are prepackaged presets that you won't have access to making any advanced changes to. However, this increased color layer that we just applied, all it's doing is it's increasing the saturation for this image. It's very, very, very simple. And it's doing so in something called a color enhancer layer. So I'm going to open up this effect drop-down menu here, and you'll see all of the different options that you have access to. You have the color enhancer, which allows you to change the color in your image. You have a tone enhancer, which allows you to do some really basic, but also some really cool tone enhancements to your photo, like brightness and contrast. You have a customized vignette creator. If you don't like the ones that are in the effects library, you can make your own, which I'll show you how to do. You can go in and you can add things like glow, sharpening, textures, whatever you want to do if you don't necessarily like some of the effects on the left-hand side, even though they're over 400. If you want to build your own, which I definitely recommend, you can do that here inside this pane. So there's a color enhancer effect that's been applied with this layer here, and it's increased the saturation. And if I want to, I can increase it even more. So if I want the color to be pumped up even more, I'll just take that saturation slider and I'll move it over to the right. And now the blue is getting kind of crazy electric, which I like. And this is much, much, much better. Now, underneath the temperature and the tint sliders is something called the color range drop-down menu. And when I open it up, it shows me all of the different separated color channels in my image from red to magenta. I can choose a specific color channel. So let's go down and let's choose the reds. We'll start out there. Now I can change the hue, the saturation, and the brightness or the lightness of just this specific color channel. Now there isn't much red in this image, but I can go in and I can saturate it quite a bit more. You'll see it's just a spattering of saturation on the mountains here, or I can completely desaturate it. If I want to completely erase the red from the image, I can go in and I can do that here as well. So for the reds, I actually want to take them and I want to reduce the redness and I want to increase kind of that orange yellowish tone of the mountain. So I'm going to take the hue slider and I'm going to move it over to the right, and you'll see it's reducing the red and it's turning those mountains just a little bit more orangey. This is a great way to customize the colors inside your image, and you can do this with every single one of the colors that you have access to. Now, sometimes I like to recommend that you go through and play around with all these different channels. For this image here, you may not necessarily know which color is going to respond to some of the areas in the mountain. So I always like to just go to the orange one, see what that's going to affect, go to the yellow one and see what that's going to affect. If you have a very simple image where it's just some reds, some yellows, some oranges, and some blues, you'll know which ones to go to. But for an image like this, you may want to play around with some of those color channels to make sure you hit up all of those different tones and colors inside that mountain. So I swapped over to the orange color range here, and I'm going to increase the saturation a little bit. And now you'll see the mountains are starting to get a little bit brighter. I'm also going to take the lightness slider and I'm going to move that over to the right. And I want to lighten up some of the oranges there. And they just get a little bit brighter, just enough to make a little bit of a difference. And then I'll take the hue slider and play around until I find the right tone for that mountain. Just a little bit different. And there we go. Now, one of the best parts about working with this color enhancer layer is there's no pre-made effects on the left-hand side that allow you to go in and actually edit each one of these color channels separately and individually. You can do very simple things like darken the sky, which is darkening the blues and the aquas. However, it doesn't necessarily allow you to go in and individually change each one of these sliders. And it's one of the many reasons why I always recommend using this effect options pane. Now, we started out by using the increase color dialog box over there, or increase color effect there, and it opened up the dialog box on the bottom right-hand corner. If I want to, I can just start out with an empty effect and add an effect options, and I'll show you how to do that now. In your effects stack, you click on the Add button, and you get an empty layer. Now we can add whatever we want. And this time, I want to add a tone enhancer layer. So we'll go to my Effect drop-down menu here inside my Effect Options pane, and I'll scroll down and choose Tone Enhancer. Now, when you choose the Tone Enhancer, one of the cool things that it does is it automatically goes into your image and tries to add automatic amount of contrast. I can turn this auto contrast off if I don't like it. I can leave it on if I do. I want to start completely from scratch, so I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to zero out all of these different sliders here so I can start from scratch. I want to do this all by hand. Now here, I can do your basics, so brightness. If I want to lighten up the image, if it's a little too dark for me, I can add a little bit more of a contrast to the image to kind of intensify those whites and those darks. I can increase something called the black point. And I realize a lot of people get confused about what this slider actually is. And I can take this black point, and what this does is it looks at your entire image. So we'll take it over and we'll move it to the right so you can actually see. and it tries to increase where it thinks the darker, blacker shadow points in your image are. I tried to use every descriptor word I could think of to help you guys understand. So it looks at your entire image and it looks at all the areas that are a little bit dark, and then it looks at the areas that are really, really dark, and it tries to slowly squash them all together. So if you have a photo where the shadows are really light and kind of boring, you want to take that black slider and you want to move it over to the right to really increase that shadow point. And that can sometimes add a little bit of deeper contrast to your image as well. So that black slider is actually really useful when you have an image that doesn't really have a lot of shadow information in it. You want to increase that black point. So I'm going to drop that over just a little bit to the right. Now, the other two sliders, you have access to increasing the brightness in the shadows. If your shadows are really, really dark and you want to brighten them up, you can do that. You can also recover some of your highlights. If you have some really bright highlights, you can reduce those as well. And then the last two here are the local contrast and the clarity sliders. And you have access to a clarity slider inside a whole bunch of other programs or something similar to a clarity slider. So what it does is it goes into your image and it takes a look at all of the different edges. So it'll look at the edges in around this cloud right here. It'll look at the edge between the cloud and the sky. It'll go in and look at the edges between a whole bunch of these little rocks inside the mountain. It'll look at the edges inside all of these different ripples in the lake. And it's going to add edge contrast to each one of those pixels. Clarity is a great way to kind of go in and sharpen up an image that looks a little dull and a little hazy. Clarity does not sharpen your image for you. If your image is out of focus, clarity is not going to fix it. And unfortunately, you have to go back and reshoot your image. So it won't fix focus, but it will go in and kind of help pump up an image that did lose just a little bit of detail, just because some digital cameras have kind of a soft, dull haze to them, and you want to go in and you want to brighten it up, but you also want to add just a little bit more clarity and detail to the edges inside your image. So the clarity slider can help really kind of intensify those edges and make them stand out a little bit more. Local contrast does a very, very similar idea, but it goes in and it pays attention to a larger range of midtones in your image. And local contrast is typically how a lot of photographers who don't have access to HDR styling photography, they add local contrast to increase kind of that HDR look. It adds contrast, but it also flattens out a large portion of your midtones. And it tries to make your image look as though it has a larger range of tonal information. This image, I don't necessarily need it. I like to keep my local contrast pretty much down to about 0. So now we've gone in and we've created our own tone enhancer layer that is specific to this image. A little bit of brightness, a little bit of contrast, and a little bit of clarity. And we've just pumped it up enough that it doesn't look quite as dull and hazy. Now, another really cool trick here inside Perfect Effects, and this is something I always like to show, is you have the option of getting rid of the panels on the left and right hand side. So we have the effect options pane open on the left, and then we have the effects stack and the effects library on the left, and the effect options and the effects stack on the right hand side. And it squishes the preview down, so you have to look at it in between these two different panels here. There's a keyboard shortcut that you can actually get rid of those panes so you can look at your full screen view. And that's by clicking on the tab key on your keyboard. So I'll press it once, it gets rid of those panels, and it opens up this kind of full screen preview. And this is a good way to see a before and after of your image without having to stare at both of those things on the left and right hand side. I want to turn my preview on and off so you guys can see our before and after here. To see your before, you press the Control P button on a PC or Command P on a Mac. This is my original image, which is very flat. It doesn't have a lot of color information. There isn't a lot of detail in there. And then when I turn my preview back on, this is my after image. We went in and we added 3 different layers, one that was pre-packaged in the effects library, which is awesome. And then we went in and we customized 2 other layers that were specific just to this image. And we've created a photo that's completely different than its original. Now, another really cool thing here inside this full screen view is on the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, you'll see there's this little A, and it's the Set the Preview Area Compare Mode button, which is I need to come up with a better name. The preview area mode button, it's a better short name for it. So when I click on this button, it's going to show me a side-by-side comparison of my before and my after. If I click it again, it shows me a split view of my before and after, a top and bottom view, and then a top and bottom split view. So this is a great way to view your before and after side by side. So instead of looking back and forth, you can actually see, oh, you know, I did like the fact that the mountains were a little redder on the left-hand side. I want to bring that back in my after image. Or maybe I don't like the intensity of the clarity on the clouds. I want to go in and reduce that effect. I like it a little bit better in the before picture. You can take a look at your before and after side by side, and this can really help your comparison. So let's go back to our just after image here. One more time. If I click on the tab button one more time, it shows me both the left and right again. And I want to save this as a preset. And this is really important. I always recommend you save everything as a preset. Presets are fantastic. Presets are the way that you can kind of save your work and reuse the same set of effects that you just created. So we went in and we added that Magic City preset. We increased a specific type of color in this image, and then we went in and we added that tone enhancer layer. And I may want to add another image of this same range of mountains. I may want to go in and I want to add the exact same preset. And I have a couple images from this trip that I took, and I want to go in and I want to make sure that they all look pretty similar and that all the mountains have the same colorings to them and all that kind of stuff. So if I go up to the preset menu and choose save preset, I can give it a name. And if I know that this preset is only gonna Oklahoma, I can spell it. If I know that this preset is going to be specific to a type of landscape, I always like to write that in the preset name. So I want to write in that it's an Oklahoma mountain landscape preset. I can place it in my landscape presets category, which I have separated from all my other categories. You'll see I have a ton of categories here because I love presets. I can type in a creator, Liz, and a description just in case I want to remember what this preset is. Once I click on create, inside my presets library, I can open up landscape presets, and you'll see I've got a ton in here that are specific. I've got landscape from Oklahoma, so I have another one that I used on the Oklahoma landscape. If I scroll down, I've got Liz's ocean preset, which is this like Technicolor preset where everything is like all the blues are super bright. And right down here is my Oklahoma mountain landscape preset. And I can go in and I can reapply this if I want. So let me cancel out of this image here. And I want to talk to you about a whole other set of information. So we went through some stuff with this landscape, but I want to talk to you a little bit more about portraits. They're kind of two separate beasts, and it's just a whole different set of information. So landscapes have kind of a special set of presets that I typically apply. I like to go through and add my own very specific individual effect options with landscapes. I like to be a little bit more specific, whereas portraits, most people are looking for very, very basic edits to their portraits. They don't want it to go overboard. Either that or a lot of people seem to want a lot of vintage looks nowadays. So let me right click on here and we'll go to edit in, perfect effects. Click on edit and let's pop into perfect effects. All right, so for this image here, on the left-hand side, I'm actually going to start out in my presets library first. And I know that seems really strange. We are in an advanced perfect effects webinar, so I'm hoping you guys pretty much know how to use the effects library at this point. So I want to talk to you guys a little bit more about customizing presets and masking here inside of perfect effects. And I have a ton of presets that we can use. So I'll open up the vintage film category, and these are all vintage film related presets that I've created that I use pretty regularly in my personal work. So I can scroll through until I find one, and I'm actually going to scroll to the top and I'm going to choose this light leak film look. I'll click on it to apply, And when you add a preset here inside Perfect Effects, it's on the right-hand side in the effects stack. It looks as though it only applies it in one layer. And you have to click on the expand button inside the effects stack to actually take a look at all of the different effects that were used to create that preset. And I always recommend that you do this. So you want to be able to actually take a look at each one of these layers and individually make it work with this specific image. I created this preset on another image and it looked great, but for this image, it's kind of blown out a little bit. And I don't necessarily like that. So I want to go back through and individualize each one of these effects. So to do that, I just start out and I click on the first effect here, the honky tonk layer. And you'll see it went in and it added this kind of warm highlights, pink undertones effect. And I can reduce the amount just a little bit. If it's just a little too intense for me, I can lower the amount slider just a little bit. And now it's not quite as yellowish pinkish. It's not blowing out the image quite as much, and I like this a little bit better. So now that I've fixed that honky tonk layer, I'll click on the mayor layer. And now you'll see it adds this really cool kind of light-like effect right along on the right-hand side along the bottom here, and then it goes up a little bit on the top left-hand side as well. I want to go in and I want to remove this effect from part of my image. You'll see if I turn it on and off, I do actually like it, but I want to go in and I want to customize it just a little bit because I don't like how it's looking on my entire photo. I want to reduce the effect, let's say, on them, and I don't like that. I have access to two different masking tools, and the one we're going to use here is called the masking brush tool. And the masking brush is a way for you to brush out an effect and get rid of it if you don't like it, or add it back in if you want to. If you messed up and you want to add it back into a certain area, you can always go in and do that. So I'm going to make sure that in my tool options bar, I choose the perfect brush option. And the perfect brush is our edge detection brush. And it goes in and it pays attention to color and tonal information. And it tries to make sure that you only paint out whichever color or tonal information you are painting over. And that'll make more sense when I actually show you how it works. So with that perfect brush selected, I want to make sure that my mode is set to paint out. I want to get rid of the effect in part of my image. And then I want to make my brush just a little bit smaller. There's actually some keyboard shortcuts that make this a lot easier to do. I can use the left and right bracket keys to resize my brush tool, and this just makes things a lot quicker. So with the left bracket key, I can make it smaller, and with the right bracket key, I can make it larger. Another really cool quick note about the left and right bracket keys is if you hold the Shift button and then click on the left bracket key, it reduces the feathering amount around the edge of the brush. If I click on the Shift key and the right bracket key, it increases the feathering amount. So two different shortcuts that make painting in and out and creating these types of masks go a little bit quicker, because you don't have to worry about going up to your tool options bar and changing all of these different settings. You can do that here right on your keyboard. All right, so let's go ahead and just start clicking over his hair. And we're just removing the effect from his hair. And you'll see it's starting to become a lot less pink, and it's reverting back to that original orangish color that his hair was. Now, the best part about using this perfect brush, you'll see, is it's not affecting any other parts of my image. It's only removing the effect from the areas that I'm painting over. So it's removing it from his face, which I don't want affected, but it's not removing it, for example, from the background of the image. It's leaving the leaves completely alone. And this is one of the many, 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 many reasons why that perfect brush is so useful, is because you can be so exceptionally specific. I can also leave her alone. It's not affecting her at all. I'm just right now removing it from his beard and from his skin. And now I've gone in and I've created this customized effect layer where I've omitted him from this effect. You don't see that weird pinkish tone that this mayor layer added to this image, and it left his hair and his skin completely alone. And I'm starting to like this a little bit more. Now, just in case you go overboard and you don't like anything when you're working on a mask, you have a reset button in the top right-hand corner, and you can completely start again from scratch. If you mess up, if you don't really like what you did, if you want to just start over again. Click on that reset button and start again. Sometimes trying to clean up a mask gets more annoying and you just want to start from scratch. So you always have access to that reset button. You also have access to the invert mask button. And this is really, really, really cool. If I wanted to remove the effect from my entire image, except for his face and his neck, I would go in and I would paint out his face and his neck because that's a much smaller area to deal with, and then click on the invert button. Now, only that part of his face, his hair, and his neck are being affected, and everything else is being left alone. This is an awesome way to use masking here inside Perfect Effects, and it can make some of those things that would be time-consuming a lot easier. And you can click it on and off. You can take a look at what your image looks like before and after, so you can use it however you like. But I always like to make sure I note that that invert button is there. It's super, super, super useful. Now, another thing that's also really cool is you can reduce the opacity of the brush and you can slowly paint out just parts of the image. So let's say I'm going to reset my mask and start from scratch. This is what the image looked like with this Mayor layer on. Let's say I really like what the layer does on part of my image, but I think it's a little too intense right here on the bottom right-hand side. Instead of painting it out completely and removing it, I can lower the opacity of my brush and slowly reduce the effect from a specific area. So if I take this opacity slider, and I'll just move that down, and let's drop it down to about maybe 40 or 50%. I'll make my brush a little bit bigger with my right bracket key, and I'm going to make it nice and big, and I want it to have a very, very soft feather amount. And I just want to slowly sweep this brush over this part of the image. Now all it's doing is it's slowly reducing the effect from this right-hand side, and everything else is at full opacity. My mask looks a little weird in my effect stack, and it's because it just removed a little bit of the effect, but not all of it completely. This is, again, a great way to customize your effect. If there's just part of your image that needs to be reduced a little bit, so if I want to go in and make my brush smaller and just reduce the effect on his hair, it's a little too pink, I'll just paint over it quickly. I have my perfect brush on, so I'm not that worried about the background or any of the other areas. And now it's just a little bit softer on his face, not quite as intense, but it still has that soft pinkish tone. So again, just more ways that you can customize each one of these layers individually. Now, once we're done with this layer, we're good to go. I've added my mask, I'm happy with it. I'll click on my last layer, which is called Nero. And the Nero layer went in and it desaturated the image quite a bit. Ooh, sorry. I want to go in and reduce this layer again. It's way, way, way too intense. So I'll take the amount slider and I'll move this over down. This is at 0. I want to take this up maybe to about 40 or 50%. Still a little pinkish, but just a little bit brighter and a little bit softer. The last thing I want to do is I want to add kind of a more intense vignette effect to this image. So I'll click on my empty layer on top, and I'll go down to my effect options, and I'll choose the vignette. Now, the great thing about making your own vignette is there are a lot of people that are very specific about the type of vignettes that they like to create. Some people don't like the ones that come prepackaged inside the effects library, and that's totally okay. Everybody has a different idea for what they want for their vignettes. Me personally, I like my vignettes to be kind of soft. I like them to be very, very subtle. So I go in and I add my own pretty regularly. So here inside the effect options pane, I can go in and I want to adjust the brightness. So I want it to be really dark around the outside. I can edit the midpoint and have it very, very close to the center, or I can pull it out so it's just changing those little tiny corners around the edge of my image. So you can play around with the size of your vignette, the feathering of your vignette. So if you want it to be super harsh, you can lower the feather amount to 0. Or if you want it to be very subtle, you can raise the amount pretty high. I a lot of times go all the way up to about 80%. And it has this really beautiful soft blur around the edge there. And then the last thing you have access to is your roundness slider. And this changes the shape. So you can select whether you want the roundness to be a little bit more around the edges and it creates more of a circular vignette, or if you take the roundness in the opposite direction, it creates kind of a closer to a square vignette almost, or a rectangular vignette with very soft edges. So play around with that roundness slider. Depending on the type of image that you're working with, this can be very helpful. Now, once I'm done with this, and I've edited my vignette and I'm happy with the way that it looks, I need to change how it's blending into my image. And there's a mode drop-down menu that allows you to choose whether you want it to be subtle or soft. I typically like to go with the soft option. That seems to be the one that I like the most. And then once I've done that, I'll go in and change my amount slider down until I'm happy. So I'll probably pop it at about 40 or 50%, and there we go. Now, once I'm done, just like before, I would save this again as a preset. We already have the light leak film look, and this could be my light leak film look with vignette. And this can be a little bit more specific to this image that I added in here. Now, the last thing that I want to talk to you guys about, I'm going to cancel out of this image, are the advanced blending options. And this is something that I like to talk about, and I always like to make sure I mention, but I feel like sometimes I forget. So I want to make sure I mention it this time because effect options are amazing. They're absolutely amazing. So let's go ahead and let's take this image here. We'll open that up and we'll pop it into Perfect Effects. All right, so inside Perfect Effects, I want to add an effect and talk to you guys about blending options. Now, the first thing I'm going to do with this image is I'm going to increase the contrast. And just like I did earlier, instead of going into the contrast category, which you can do, don't ever feel like you can't access the contrast category. I just want to, again, show you guys how cool the effect options pane is. If I go to the effects drop-down menu and choose tone enhancer, it goes in and it applies auto contrast for me. So I always like to do this. It pumps up my image and makes it look really good. And most of the time it does an awesome job. The only thing I'll do is reduce my local contrast slider a little bit. But other than that, I'm pretty happy with this image now. I just wanted to pump everything up. Now I'll click on the Add button and go up to a very unsuspecting category. It's called the Antique category. And I'm going to choose something called Antique Flat Brown. And I know this seems super weird right now. Just go with me just for a second. Here with this image, it adds this flat layer to my photo, and it looks really, really weird. Now I can go in and I can change my amount slider just by reducing it a little bit, but it still looks really weird. I want to go in and I want to open up the options pane, and it's the options button here inside your effects stack. And once it opens, you'll see you have all of these brand new options, all these really, really cool options. And so many people don't know that this exists, which I think is really sad because this is like one of the coolest parts about Perfect Effects. And I always get really excited when I talk about it because it's just so much fun. So for this layer, I want to take this antique flat brown, this very, very warm layer, and I want to change how it's interacting with my original image. And right now I don't like it. So the first thing I can do is change my blending mode. And the blending mode, if you're a Photoshop user, you're going to recognize this drop-down menu here. I can go in and I can select a blending mode that works better for this image. So you have something called multiply, which darkens and blends it in at the same time. These are kind of, I'm going to do highlights, so kind of the more popular blending modes. Screen blends it in, lightens the image. You have overlay and soft light, which are two that work very well when you're working with textures and borders and you want to blend them in very well. Overlay and soft light are going to do that. The one that we're going to use for this image seems a little strange. We're going to swap it over to color. So now we don't have that weird duotone flat look to the image. I'm swapping it over and I'm pulling the beautiful color out of that layer and leaving that weird posterized look out of it. So I'll select the color layer. Now the next thing that I want to do is choose which part of my image this effect is being applied to. And this drop-down menu is awesome, and it's insanely useful when you're working with this kind of imagery and this kind of effect. I can choose that I want to change this and only affect the highlights in my image, which you'll see it's only adding that warmer tone to the highlights. I can do this with the shadows as well if I want to warm up the shadows a little bit, which is what we're going to eventually be doing. I can choose a certain color channel here. So as I scroll through, certain parts of the image are being affected. When I select yellows, you'll see all the yellows get a little bit browner. We have access to a flesh colors and a vivid colors option, as well as neutrals. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to choose shadows here. There's a fuzziness slider, which if I take this all the way down to the left, it adds a little bit of a stricter format to what is a shadow and what isn't. Whereas if you take this fuzziness slider and you move it over to the right, it softens and almost feathers the edge of where the highlights and the shadows and the midtones or whatever you're doing are being affected. So this fuzziness slider can help make that transition a little bit softer. So play around with that slider a little bit if you're inside this dialog box. Now I'm going to take my amount slider and I'm going to move it over to the left and I'm going to soften it just a little bit. And then the last thing here that we actually didn't use is the protect section. And I'm actually going to change this apply effect to menu and I'm going to swap it over to all here so I can actually show you guys how this protect section works. This allows you to protect certain tones in your image. So you can protect the highlights and you can bring back your original highlights. You can bring back your original shadows and you can bring back flesh colors. So this is a great way to protect certain tones in your image as well. So for this image, all I want to do is just apply it to those shadows and we'll reduce the effect just a little bit. Now, once I'm done, inside this box, I want to click on apply. Now, I know it doesn't seem like this effect actually did that much. We're looking at this image and we're going, this looks pretty much the same. However, if I turn this eye icon next to my effect layer on and off, you'll see the before and after. My before, all of those shadows are really cool. We have all these bluish tones here on the post, a lot of blue tones down here in the bottom where all of these shadows are in the background. And when I turn this effect back on, it's cooled down all of those shadows and it's added that really nice kind of warmish brownish look to it. It doesn't do a ton to the eye, but it cools down a lot of things that are very, very important. Now, really quickly, just in case you guys missed it, the blending options panel that I just opened up is clicking the options button inside my effects stack. And you can access this with every single layer that you apply: textures, borders, vignettes, tone enhancers, color enhancers. You can use it with any of the effects that we create, any of the effect options that you create. This blending options dialog box that I popped open is available with every single effect you open. So always remember that you have access to this no matter what. Now, the last thing that I want to talk to you guys about is another masking tool. And I'm going to go in and click on the add button one more time. And I'm going to add an effect option here. I'm going to go in and I'm actually going to add let's add a photo filter layer. And this seems really boring at first, but just go with me here. We're going to add a custom color vignette to this image. Seems really weird at first. Again, just go with me here. This is something, I've been asked this a couple of times, and I really think it's a cool effect for an image. And I always like to show it because it can be really fun. I use this in my work a lot. So maybe it's just me, or maybe other people really like it. But I'm going to show you how to do a couple different things here. And this will be my last little bit in the tutorial, and then I'll go through and answer a couple of other questions. So here in the effects options pane, this is the photo filter option. And I love photo filters. They're a great way to color your image, change the tone of your image, and a whole bunch of stuff. So right up at the top, there's a preset drop-down menu, and these are pre-made color presets that are specific to your image. Some of them are something called graduated filters, and these allow you to change the color of a certain part of your image, so the top, the bottom, the left, or the right. So if you have a landscape and you only want to change the top of your image, you could go in and you can add a graduated filter. For now, what I want to do is I want to create a customized kind of bright red vignette around this image. That seems, again, it seems a little weird at first. Now, you can also change the color If you don't like the colors in the presets, don't worry about it. Choose your own color by selecting it. Right here, if you click on the color swatch next to color word, it opens up your select color dialog box. And this allows you to change whether you want your color to be darker, if you want it to be lighter, whatever you want to do, you can change the color and the tone of your photo filter here. And I'll go ahead and click on OK. You can change the strength of your filters if you want it to be really strong, which we're going to do just so you guys can actually see what I'm doing to the image. It seems outlandish right now, just go with it. So I can change the strength here. And then I can also go down and right at the bottom, you can change the mode. There's a strong option, which is a really intense, high contrast, high saturation option. Subtle is a little bit easier on the eyes. It's a little bit softer than the strong option. And then you have two called clean highlights and clean shadows. And this is a way to add a filter that help you make sure that your highlights and your shadows are a little bit more protected. So whichever option you decide, you can go for it. I'm going to choose the subtle option. Now, once I have this selected, I need to create that specific mask vignette. And this is something that I could do with my brush tool if I wanted to. However, it would be really annoying. Getting a perfectly round center of my image would drive me crazy, or at least I think it would be really irritating. If you're very specific, go for the brush tool and have a blast. However, I want to use something called the masking bug tool. And this creates a specific mask that is either rectangular or round. And to use it, you select the tool on the left-hand side and just click once in your image. And it'll add this little masking bug. Now, right now it's selected as a rectangular bug, which I'm just going to show you really quick. This is great for landscapes, you guys, if you do landscapes. You can click and drag this bug. There are little arms on the top and the bottom or the left and the right that help you resize it and rotate it if you want to. And you'll see anywhere that the grid is on top of the image, my photo is coming through and it's removing that red photo filter. And this is why I use that really strong red filter so you guys can actually see what's going on. Now, I want to change this over to a round filter. I don't like the planar one. It's not going to work with this image. So I'll just go up to my tool options bar and change my shape over to round. And now I can go in and I can resize and create my own vignette. So I'm just clicking and dragging the arms right here, clicking and dragging, and there we go. You can reposition it and resize it however you want. Now, once it's kind of near where you want it to be in your image, make it just a little bit taller there. Once it's in the area of your image that you want, you can change the feathering amount, which is either up in the tool options bar, or you can use the little arms, the clear dot arms on the bug. Some people like to do it in the tool options bar. Some people like to do it with the little arms. It just depends. They do the exact same thing, just in case you wanted to know. Now, here, I'll take the arm and I'm going to move it down, and that reduces the feathering amount to 0. So now it's just a flat edge. If I take this arm and I raise it all the way up, it's going to create a very soft feathering. And now there's a much softer transition between the center of the image and the outside of the image. I can also go in and I can change the layer opacity. So if I were to reduce the amount of the layer, I can just move this little arm in towards the center of my image. And now you'll see the red edge is becoming a little bit softer. And then I can also change the mask opacity. And this one is really cool, really, really cool. If I take this arm and I move it in towards the center of my bug, it reveals just a little bit of the filter. So now there's a tiny bit of that red tone on my image, but not as much as the outside of my image. So you have 3 different options here that you have access to.